Learning to count on these fingers was probably one of your first educational experiences. Now, when you see a hand raised high, what do you think about? Maybe someone waving hello? Do I see a question in the audience? Or maybe it's just a high five as you're passing someone in the hallway. From something so open and welcoming, when we start to retract these fingers, we get a rock. This is something that shows strength. Or perhaps it's a warning to someone that's threatening us. In our field, as security professionals, the ability to adapt from something so open to something so strong is what has made us successful. Also, as part of our normal routine, we come across words such as breach. These sinister words make CIOs and CISOs start polishing off their resume, or perhaps they're being ushered in a room to talk about the benefits of early retirement. CFOs start crunching numbers to figure out the financial viability of their company, and CEOs begin preparing answers to questions that hopefully rebuild the trust that they may have lost in their company. Do you recognize any of these? All of these businesses have had to deal with the word breach in the past year. So why are so many companies falling victim to breaches? Is security really that hard? Maybe. As you know, there's no simple answers to the complex problems that we're facing as security professionals. Oftentimes, we ask our businesses to provide us with the resources to implement security, but we're faced with issues of funding, or perhaps our idea of security doesn't align with that of the business. In my experience, over 90% of the companies that are falling victim to breaches have failed to do the 5 basics that we're going to go over today. But before we start counting off, let's go ahead and focus on the biggest part of our hand, our palm. This represents our culture. And the culture is the binding element that makes the 5 principles of security possible. One of the hardest things that we have to do as security professionals is to educate and to influence our business. After all, if you're going to implement a working system, people have to buy into that system. So let's quickly talk about the 5 principles of influence. The first is liking. Aren't some people just likable? There's actually 2 characteristics that go into being likable. The first is being similar, having something in common. The second, being familiar, being a common presence. So what does that mean to you as a security professional? You have to get out from behind your desk and go meet the people that are making your business successful. And you're going to need to do it again and again. Scarcity. We want something more when it's less available. Have you ever noticed that when you're buying a plane ticket, there's 3 more seats available at this price? Or maybe when you're online shopping, you see 9 items left. It's pretty compelling, right? When you give your message of security, have it have a hint of exclusivity. Here's what the really savvy companies are doing. Here's where the leaders are making their decisions. Reciprocity, the idea that if you do something for me, I'm going to feel obligated to do something for you. So in your day-to-day life, when you're out there, if you get the opportunity to give a helping hand, make sure that you do that. These are the people that are going to become your security champions. And lastly, social proof. The idea that we make decisions based on what we see other people doing. And this is where you're really going to see your cultural change. If you can get your people to start following security practices, others will naturally follow. It just starts with that one. A wise man once said that knowing is half the battle. And I would say that knowing will determine the success of your security program. Now, what I'm talking about knowing are not all of your threat vectors and details about your attacker or maybe the latest security event that's in the news. All these are important. What I'm talking about knowing are the items that you chose to defend, the things that you welcomed inside your company, and that's your inventory. There are actually two kinds of inventory that we're going to discuss. The first is things that your executives probably thought about. Your executives are probably a little confused on why inventory is so important to you as a security professional. Inventory actually makes up 40% of our security basics. So let's discuss that first one that they may have thought about, your devices. Do you know what's on your network? If you're a small company, you may could get away with an Excel sheet, but let's assume your business is slightly more complex. Sit down and talk with your executives. Start listing off items that you're responsible for safeguarding. You have your workstations, your laptops, your mobile devices. You have servers. You have routers. You have switches. You have HVAC systems, wireless devices, light bulbs. All of those other IoT devices that make that customer and user experience so much better. Now, do they feel secure with a human's management of the additions, removals, and modification of all that equipment? If not, they can help you out with an adequate inventory tool. And what about the devices that you didn't put on your network? You're going to need some type of network access control, like a 802.1x, or perhaps you're using client certificates to authenticate to your network. All of these very complex terms that we just used, executives may have a hard time following. So help them out with analogy. Suppose they went on vacation and they put their dog in their neighbor's backyard. When that neighbor woke up, would they know that they're responsible for safekeeping of that dog? Would they know who that dog belonged to? Would they know if that animal was friendly or not? The bottom line is you can't defend what you don't know. Now, that's our first item of inventory. The second is what you put on the devices, your software. Just like your devices, you're going to need to know details about your software, the software type, version, and every system it's implemented on. For even small businesses, this can be challenging. Make sure that you're requesting a configuration management tool to track this information. Likewise, what about this software that you didn't put on your network? In some cases, application whitelisting could be an option. Or maybe you have a logical control in place that are going to prevent people from downloading or executing software. Remember, you can't defend what you don't know you have. So let's go ahead and close the loop on inventory. Oops, excuse me. We have our hardware and our software, which come together to make a zero. Now, this is our goal. 0 unknown devices on our inventory. And that's going to leave us with 3 supporting management tasks. I call them supporting because they're only effective if you know what you're protecting. And likewise, you can only manage what you know. Do you remember this toy? I love watching my daughter try to grind and fit the pieces into place. She gets frustrated when she can't line up those shapes just right to fill in those gaps. Oftentimes, this is the same problem we encounter when we're determining our configuration. The first thing you need to do in configuration management is determine your standard. This is your baseline. Once you determine what your standard is going to be, safeguard it. Put it in a location where it's not going to be accidentally tampered with. You also may want to look at using some file integrity management to ensure that that baseline is not changing. Next, and most importantly, always build to standard. Now, I do understand that there will be some times that you do need to modify this, and that's when your change control process comes into play. But as a general rule, always build to standard. Also, you may want to look at implementing your GPOs. Anytime that you can introduce consistency into your network, you're going to save time, money, and gain better visibility into your security program. After you start building these systems to standard and rolling them out, you want to periodically check that those systems aren't being tampered with. In order to do this, you'll need some kind of configuration monitoring tool. Now, once you feel that all the pieces are in their right place, realize that there's still going to be some gaps that provide functionality. They allow those pieces to slide in and out, but they also bring the need for our fourth security basic, which is vulnerability management. Have your executive imagine that their house was made of glass. What could a thief learn by just sitting outside and watching? They would learn maybe where your valuables are and the correct and quickest way to get to them. The person responsible for opening and closing your safe and what times they were likely to do that. Where your keys were hanging and what doors they opened. Maybe they'd even learn some embarrassing facts about you or your family members. And if they had enough time, they would learn your alarm system, all the sensors, and the code you use to secure your entire life. Bad guys are watching, and vulnerabilities is what allows them to see inside. We have to accept vulnerabilities because we need to be operational and functional. Could you imagine your business so secure that no one could get in or out? Or so accessible that customers could access every part of your company? Defending vulnerabilities can be hard. It's not an easy thing to do. But your executives can help you with scanning your network by providing you a vulnerability scanner. Realize this is a tool and it will need to be tweaked. And your team will need to get those results and determine how critical they are based on where they sit in your network and the devices and software that they're defending. One thing that you want to note when you're doing scans is if you can see yourself scanning. If you can't see yourself, you're not going to be able to see anyone else scanning your network, which is a vulnerability in and of itself. Now, thanks to the media, your executives have probably heard the phrase 0 days, those vulnerabilities that are just sitting and waiting to be discovered. Explain this further to them by supposing their child has rigged a window to allow their friends to sneak in and out of the house undetected. Obviously, as a parent, you can't do anything to correct the problem unless you know about it. And that's why staying up to date is so important. You need to make sure that you're subscribing to intelligence services. Now, there are some free ones out there. You may already have access to some based on other products that you own. Once you're up to date and you know your vulnerabilities, patch them. Manual patching is probably unrealistic, so make sure that your executives are aware that you're going to need that automated patching tool. And once you patch, make sure you follow up do a scan, and ensure that the vulnerabilities that you thought you remediated are no longer there. So now let's move away from the more hard targets to the softer ones. We're going to talk about privileged access management. These are managing the people that have their hands in your cookie jar. This could absolutely be a cultural issue, and executives need to know that they have a role to play here. People with these advanced permissions can affect all of the security basics we've already discussed. They can add devices or software. They can change your configurations, and therefore they can have an impact on your vulnerabilities. The first thing you need to do goes back to knowing who has physical and logical access to your systems. Each person with these advanced permissions should have a valid business justification, and executives should be signing off on these people. Also, you want to make sure that you're not accidentally giving away this domain or root access. And what I mean is check for default passwords. If you have a working inventory system, you can ensure that no device is added to your network without changing one of these passwords. A lot of vulnerability scanners can also look for this inconsistency. And lastly, how are your privileged access users authenticating to your network? If you're requiring complexity, you may need to bolt onto your Active Directory. But most importantly, you want to make sure that you're using some multi-factor authentication or a privileged access management tool to provide that extra level of security. So let's quickly recap. We have our devices and software. It's come together to create that zero, our goal of 0 unknown devices. Then our configuration management, vulnerability management, and our privileged access management. Now, when these come together, we get that secure program that we're working towards. But none of these fingers are operational without the executives building that culture. I'll leave you with a quote from Captain Jack Sparrow. The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. So maybe security isn't that hard. Maybe security is not the problem. Maybe if we change our attitude, change our culture, it'll make counting to 5 a lot easier. I'd like to thank you for reviewing the security basics with me. I invite each of you to go back to your executives and start teaching them how to count to 5. Through changes in processes and changes in culture, we can all get the reassurance that we're going to be okay.